Hi, everyone. This is part 2 of our interview with our Director of Organizing and Policy, Amy Blumsack. Welcome back, Amy, for part 2 of This Week at Neighbors Together. If you were following along on our Facebook Live, we did have some technical difficulties yesterday, but we're back and we want to continue to talk about our community action program and the things that we're doing right now for our members and how we're working with our members and how we're highlighting so many things going on in the city right now during this COVID-19 crisis. So yesterday we talked about, and if you want to go see that interview, the audio on my part is a little shaky, but we'll be posting it on YouTube before this, so it should be up and you can go watch that. But we were talking about what our community action program is and what it does and how those things have changed now that COVID has come to light. And has, really taken a toll on New York City and the world. So one of the ways that we have engaged with our membership and other organizations is through the Homeless Can't Stay Home Coalition. And this is a newly formed coalition campaign around having homeless New Yorkers being able to utilize 30,000 of the 100,000 plus vacant hotel rooms in New York City, really calling on the mayor and the city to take care of our homeless neighbors and police sweeps that we're seeing in New York City at a much higher rate and a higher amount, and find permanent housing for our homeless neighbors. So we covered a lot on our last interview, and I wanted to continue the conversation with Amy about the subway sweeps that we're seeing in, in New York City right now, because they're such a huge topic. And we're seeing so many, opposing opinions, a lot of horrible, unfortunate stereotypes around homeless people coming to light with these subway sweeps. So Amy, can you talk a bit more about the subway sweeps, when they started and what we're seeing now?
Yes, absolutely. So prior to COVID, right, there was already there was already a criminalization of homeless people on the subway, right? Like there are police out enforcing, really like minor infractions that don't really get enforced against people who don't look homeless, whatever that means. And so now with COVID, we have seen that increase significantly, right? So we were seeing sort of this, as Christina alluded to, like, or said, there was this like sort of like doubling down on the stigma and really unfair and inaccurate stereotypes about homeless people. And, we saw like the governor hold up the Daily News, or, a paper with a picture of homeless people sleeping on the subway and say, "This is disgusting." So since then, this sort of unfair stigmatization and criminalization of homeless people, the city and state have doubled down on that by shutting down the subways. This is unprecedented in the subway's history. So for the first time in the entire history, the 100 plus years of the subway, it's being shut down from 1 to 5 a.m. And all people are being kicked off of the trains, both at the end of the lines and also, starting at around 12:30. What we're hearing from people on the ground is that officers are often getting on the trains and starting to kick people off. So this is deeply problematic because, as we said in our previous interview, many people are now relying on the subways as the safest place they have to stay, because so many people are packed into these congregate or dormitory style shelters. It is a breeding ground for COVID. It is unsafe. People cannot safely socially distance. They can't follow the CDC guidelines that all the rest of us are being told over and over to follow. So people are astutely saying, "I'm not going to go to shelter. I'll stay on the subway instead. It's a better choice for me." So by shutting down the subway, what we're seeing is this mass displacement of all of these people with no real ultimate solution at the end. I mean, first of all, it's criminalizing. Second of all, the mayor's representing really inaccurately what's happening when people are being kicked off. There are a limited number of outreach workers at the end of line stations. There's certainly not enough outreach workers to reach every single person who is being displaced from the subway during these hours, which means most people will be interacting with police, it's scary. It's literally dangerous and sometimes can be life-threatening, as we've seen by watching the news and following police interaction. And then also, what's the services that are being offered are going to congregate shelters. At first we saw that a lot of people were being piled onto buses and taken down to the 30th Street intake shelter, which is this massive congregate shelter where people do their intake before they're shuffled to other shelters. And so that's obviously not a safe place for people to go. Sometimes people didn't even know they were going there. So people would get on the bus because they felt coerced or weren't clear or didn't get all the information, arrived at the 30th Street shelter, said, what? I don't want to be here. And then just wandered off into the night, or for people who are already just like, I can't do this. I don't want this kind of interaction. They're basically being kicked off the trains and left to fend for themselves for hours at a time in the middle of the morning,
Right.
Very unsafe.
And the 30th Street shelter is notoriously unsafe, right?
Right. I mean, there have been a lot of press coverage about how it is an unsafe place. And we know just by fact that it's a very large shelter where if people are strategically choosing not to be in crowded places because of COVID, they're not going to want to go to the 30th Street intake shelter. And then that goes back to our ask, in the campaign. This is why we need people in congregate shelter settings and street homeless New Yorkers to be offered individual hotel rooms. The mayor is misrepresenting the numbers of people who are accepting services. These are mostly just people who get on the bus with the numbers he's reporting are not the numbers of people who go into shelter and stay in shelter. They're just basically people who get on a bus and then who knows what happens to them.
Right.
But, the other line that is getting put out there a lot is that people are not, people are refusing help. And it's not that they're refusing help. They're saying no to a choice that feels like a bad choice to them.
Right.
And in our Homeless Can't Stay Home campaign, we have a fundraiser where we have a GoFundMe to get donations to help pay for individual hotel rooms with private bathrooms, like what we're advocating for in the campaign. And every single person who's been offered a private hotel room with a single bathroom private to themselves has said yes with zero hesitation. And we have had so many people reach out to us asking if they can get into a hotel room. So I think it's not that people are refusing services, it's that people are making smart choices for themselves about what is best for them. And what is best for people right now in this moment, this very long and probably continuing for quite a while moment, is that we need to get them safe places to socially distance. And that means individual hotel rooms with private bathrooms.
Right. And so much of what we're hearing is around this choice and testimony during these hearings or people giving, their accounts during press conferences. So many of the people who are living on the street or living in their car or being kicked off the subway are saying that they would take this option. And then what the media and what the city is saying is that we offered services and these people are just straight up denying these services. And so I think what's missing in that narrative is, well, the options are not good options.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that overview of what's going on. And one thing that I also wanted to talk about was, the fact that over this past weekend in New York City, we experienced freezing temperatures. We experienced freezing rain. In certain areas of the Northeast, there was snow and hail and flurries at some point. What was the city's response to essentially this code blue moment during this crisis?
So it was an extremely lackluster response, to say the least. There was very little extra precautions taken by the city. Advocates had to fight really hard to even get the city to agree to go out and distribute blankets, right? Ultimately, transit decided to put a few what they called warming buses at the end of line stations because it was a code blue, which means, as you said, it drops below freezing. Typically on a code blue night, hospitals open their doors so that homeless people or unsheltered people can be inside in the emergency room where it's warm. But because of COVID, only one of all of the public hospitals opened their doors. So there was no place for homeless people to go to stay safe from literally freezing to death. And so the city decided to finally put a few warming buses at the end of line stations. However, there wasn't even heat on in the buses. People didn't have masks. So people, again, were in freezing temperatures close to each other no PPE, no way to protect against COVID, no real connection to other services, right? It was a completely inadequate response. And it's really shameful that this is the best that our government can do for people like who live here and who deserve to stay safe from COVID, just like any of the rest of us do.
Right, especially when we have an order from the health commissioner and funding from FEMA that could be an option for our homeless neighbors.
That's correct. And the hotel rooms.
And the
There's
hotel rooms, yeah.
an abundance of hotel rooms that are available that people would go into now if the city
Right.
would just make it happen.
Yeah. So if people want to take action, if they're listening to this and they're like, this is not great, and I really, am outraged or disgusted as we are with these actions, where can they go to take action?
Okay, that's a great question. If people are interested in learning more or taking action, please go to our website, homelesscan'tstayhome.org. No apostrophe in can't, homelesscan'tstayhome.org. And it's a really fantastic website that lays out a lot of information about our demands. It has a ton of press about the issue and about the campaign, so you can really read up and learn more. There's also a link on our website to our GoFundMe page, which is where you can go make a donation to help ensure that street homeless New Yorkers will be able to get into individual hotel rooms and safely social distance and take care of themselves in the way that so many want to, just don't have the means to on their own yet. So, it's something that we're doing as an emergency measure while we wait for the city to take appropriate action. So if you would please, everyone, go to homelesscan'tstayhome.org and check out the website, and also go to our GoFundMe page and make a donation. That would be extremely helpful, and it would be helping to potentially save lives.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. So I want to pivot to another campaign that we were working with and a part of before COVID, but obviously now is getting more traction and more light, which is the Housing Justice for All campaign. Can you talk about Housing Justice for All and the work that we're doing right now?
Yes. So Housing Justice for All is a statewide campaign. It's part of the Upstate Downstate Coalition, and we have tenants groups and public housing groups and groups that work with homeless New Yorkers from all across New York State. And we are fighting for a New York Homes Guarantee. And we were fighting for that before COVID. That since COVID has hit, it has really just sort of laid bare the fractures that already existed in the foundations of our society, and has really so starkly exposed all of the ways in which our housing is inequitable and unjust, and all of the ways in which housing is actually healthcare, right? To have somewhere stable and safe to go that is permanent and affordable literally helps people to preserve their health and at times their life. And so, Housing Justice for All has pivoted in this moment to respond to the moment where it has become extremely clear that thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are already living on the edge in New York City and New York State can now no longer pay their rent, right?
Yeah.
And so we are calling on the government to cancel rent, and we are also calling on the government to immediately house the homeless, right? We know that people can't pay rent. We know that no matter what happens, people won't be able to pay rent. They've lost their jobs. The economy is not going to rebound immediately. People will need time. And so we're calling on the government to step in and protect tenants, and to put in some policies into place to make sure that there isn't a massive wave of evictions and a massive increase in homelessness across New York State. Right. And we're also calling on the government to immediately rehouse the homeless, as we've just been talking about, but at the state level.
Great. What are we seeing from people who are currently in that situation where they can't pay rent? I know we've had a few town halls, and we've had a few people pop up and say, this is what's happening. And we've heard of, we had this eviction moratorium that is not great lifted. Right. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So I think so often one of the talking points that we hear from landlords or landlord groups about this idea that we should cancel rent is that landlords are going to take the hit. And, when we say cancel rent, the governor has said, well, we have an eviction moratorium, but the truth is that the eviction moratorium only lasts until June, right? And so the concern is that there's going to be a massive wave of evictions starting immediately in June if we don't do something between now and then. And, there was a recent announcement by the governor, much more recently, about a new executive order that he sort of described as though we're extending the eviction moratorium until August, but it's not true. If you look at the executive order, the language of the order actually weakens the previous executive order and puts far more people at risk of being imminently evicted in the middle of this COVID crisis. So we really, really need the government, and the governor in particular, to cancel rent. And we have a whole page set up. I'll give you guys the website. I'll give it to you now, actually, because that will be easier. So if you go to housingjusticeforall.org, and then you click on the COVID-19 response, you're going to see all of our demands about canceling rent and reclaiming our homes. And there's all of these sub-tabs that you can, or links that you can click on that link you to a toolkit, talk about why we're fighting for canceling rent. We talk about tenants' rights, what to do if you can't pay rent, how we are using this moment to really re-envision a more just housing system so that housing is accessible and affordable and permanent for everyone who needs it, and not a commodity that people use to make money on the backs of others, continuing to increase homelessness across New York State. And so there's a lot of really great information on there. And people should also sign our petition, which you can link through the website.
We'll link everything in the description and in comments and stuff like that.
Great. Yeah. And, and also for both of these campaigns, I think folks should be following along on Twitter, because there's a lot of really great information on Twitter, and you can find some really good information about the newest eviction moratorium extension, which it's not, and the executive order and what that really means for people.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Amy. So the last thing I want to touch on, well, I have two things. Well, first is the Value in Housing campaign. We talked in our prior interview about what that is. And so can you talk about the Value in Housing campaign and how it looks right now during COVID?
Yeah, so during COVID, I mean, as with everything, we're all a little bit flipped upside down. But, one thing that's really clear in our Value in Housing campaign is that there are all these people who are stuck in the shelter system during this extremely dangerous moment with a paper that says they're approved for a voucher, but because the vouchers don't pay market rate rent, they're not competitive in the market, and people can't find housing with them. So there are people languishing in the dangerous shelter system right now, unable to move out into permanent housing that they have a voucher for because they don't pay market rate rent. And so in our Value in Housing campaign, we're really, we know that now more than ever, it is critical that vouchers pay market rate rent, fair market rent, and that people be able to have an effective tool to move out of homelessness and into permanent housing. And so, we're going to be continuing to push for that bill to get passed. And, also there's some other really common sense bills that we are fighting for, like a Know Your Rights bill, should be issued so that anyone who's getting a rental assistance subsidy understands what their legal rights are, understands what source of income discrimination looks like, and can really identify when someone is discriminating against them because of how they're going to pay their rent, and then know the clear steps to take to fight back and enforce against that kind of discrimination. So that's some of the stuff that we're continuing to work on in Value in Housing. And we're really excited and really determined to make sure that people are able to get housed in this critical moment.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's one of the heartbreaking parts of this, is having people remain in the shelter when they were just on the precipice of leaving and not having that market rate rent be attainable is really, really something that we're seeing before and after COVID. So speaking of all these issues, Natalie and I touched on this last time, but something that I think we're seeing so clearly is that this crisis is amplifying so much of what we were having issues with before, of all of the systemic issues that we were seeing before. And at Neighbors Together, the community action program is really aiming to get at those root causes of poverty and hunger. Can you talk more about what you're seeing and kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I alluded to this before, but I think that for so many of us who are more privileged or who haven't had to deal with the kind of poverty that some of our members face, it's easy to turn a blind eye, or it's easy to be sort of like focused on our own problems and our own struggles. And I think that what's happening is this COVID crisis is really exposing the way that the systems are and like structures of our society are inherently benefiting and purposely designed to benefit some and really at the expense of the rest of us. And so, I feel like, I hope that this is a moment like that, in this moment of massive tragedy for our city and our state and our country, that the silver lining is that we can, those of us who might not have been exposed to this kind of information in our normal lives are now being able to look around and say, wow, I see how the like underpinnings of our society actually never set us up for success, and that there are specific ways that we need to change things so that we're never in this situation again. Making sure that there's like permanent affordable housing available to people who are homeless. So the next time we have a COVID spike, we're not back fighting for this exact same thing and costing lives. We're
Right.
making sure that people who are housed already, but who are struggling to make ends meet, whether it's a lot or just a little, there's so many people in this city are just one paycheck away from not being able to pay rent, that we need to make sure that we're working together, all of us, to fight for stronger tenant protections and like a true rent cancellation policy that will support people to stay in their homes and make sure that like private equity firms don't get to profit off of this pandemic in a way that will only further hurt tenants down the road, and just to really think about how can we use our voices and use our minds and like follow along with the issues that are being brought up right now through COVID, and really advocate for just policies that will support all of us. I think one other thing about COVID is that it has really laid bare how truly interconnected we all are.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels easy to ignore that in more normal times, but I think this is really like underscored that we are actually all very, very interconnected, and what happens in one section of society does have effects on the other. And so I hope that we will see that and come together to fight for a more just society, and that, people can really understand that there are very concrete ways that we can take action in this moment to fight for those things.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you, Amy. And thank you for popping on to talk about our community action program for part 2. And thank you all for watching us. We'll be back hopefully next week with another interview with a staff member for This Week at Neighbors Together. We are so grateful for all of your support. We'll link all of the links that Amy mentioned in our description and in the comments, so you guys have them. And if you'd like to support Neighbors Together right now in our emergency relief services, you can go to neighborstogether.org/help. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks, everyone.